All right, let's dive in. Today we're looking at the horror movie Smile.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah, we've got this video review we're going to deep dive on, and
Okay.
the reviewer started off thinking Smile was just another generic horror flick,
Right.
but they ended up being completely blown away.
Yeah.
So we're going to unpack all that and see if Smile is worth adding to your watch list.
It's so fascinating how, like, the reviewer's journey kind of mirrors how a lot of horror fans probably experience these movies, right?
For sure.
Like, you see the poster,
Yeah.
maybe a trailer, you hear the buzz, and you're just kind of like, huh, another one of these. But this review reminds us that sometimes those first impressions can be totally deceiving.
Definitely. It makes you wonder what it was about Smile that really surprised the reviewer. Is
Yeah.
it just like a cool twist, or is there something deeper going on?
Well, right away, the reviewer admits to being biased going in.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they saw the Letterboxd score, and it wasn't
What?
great. So they kind of had these low expectations.
Okay.
But as they watched, something clicked.
Hmm. So what was that click? What, like, elevated this movie above just typical horror?
It seems like the execution was key.
Okay.
They say that Smile borrows from other horror movies like The Ring or It Follows,
Hmm.
but the way these familiar elements combine actually works really well.
So it's not always about reinventing the wheel,
Right.
but, like, taking what we know and crafting it into something new and effective.
Yeah. Like, think of how a musician can use the same notes as everyone else,
Right.
but create a whole new melody.
Totally. Yeah.
It's all about the artistry.
The subtle nuances that elevate something from predictable to, like, genuinely terrifying.
Yeah. Yep.
And what I found interesting was how the review connects Smile to something way deeper than just scares,
Oh, yeah.
trauma, and mental health.
Absolutely. When horror's done well, it can be so much more than just jump scares and gore. It can really explore those darker parts of being human.
Yeah, it's powerful. Like that.
The reviewer sees this movie as a powerful allegory for how we all, like as people in a society, how we deal with inner turmoil.
It's like that whole thing, like put on a happy face.
Right. But taken to like a scary extreme.
Oh, for sure.
Yikes.
So it's about when we try to suppress our trauma and, like, put on this brave face, pretend everything's okay when it's really not.
Yeah.
Like, burying our pain doesn't make it go away. It just festers.
Right. And the reviewer thinks this theme might hit even harder in cultures where mental health is stigmatized.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, like in Latin America, for example.
It's almost like the film is saying, hey, it's okay to not be okay.
Yeah, giving permission to acknowledge the dark stuff we're told to hide.
Exactly. And then there's the central image of the movie, the smile.
Oh, yeah, it's not just a title.
Right.
That creepy smile is everywhere in the movie.
It's so unsettling. What makes it so effective? Why is it so terrifying?
Think about it. We associate a smile with happiness, warmth, connection.
Mm-hmm.
But in Smile, it's twisted into something sinister.
Right.
It represents that facade we put up to hide our real feelings.
It's like the movie is saying, don't trust appearances.
Right.
Like that smile could be hiding something dark and sinister.
Totally. That's what makes it so chilling. Taking something we understand,
Yeah.
something human, and flipping it on its head.
It's like taking something we trust and weaponizing it.
Exactly.
Okay, let's talk about jump scares.
Oh, yeah. Those are a classic horror staple.
Right.
And, some people find them predictable, but the reviewer actually thinks they work really well in Smile.
Okay.
They're not just random jolts. They're carefully designed to build tension and unease.
So it's about how the jump scares contribute to the overall atmosphere.
Yes. It's not just about the shock. It's about that feeling of dread and suspense.
Like a tightening spring, slowly coiling until it snaps.
Yeah, good analogy.
And then we have to consider how they're tied into the film's psychology.
Right.
They're not just cheap thrills. They're working with the themes of trauma and mental decline.
Exactly. Like each jump scare is another crack in the protagonist's sanity.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, it's visual.
Their world crumbling around them.
And we can't forget the gore. The review mentions that too.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
They argue that the violence, while disturbing, adds to the feeling of trauma.
Mm-hmm.
It creates this visceral experience that reflects the protagonist's mental state.
So it's not just violence for the sake of violence.
Right.
It's about connecting us to the character's emotional state.
It becomes a reflection of their inner turmoil, the breakdown of their well-being.
And the review really emphasizes their empathy for the main character, Dr. Rose Carter.
Yeah, the reviewer felt that her struggle was so relatable.
It's like we're watching her unravel, and that's terrifying.
It really makes you ask yourself, what would I do if my reality was falling apart?
If everything you thought you could trust was turned against you, that's a scary thought.
Yeah, one that sticks with you.
What's interesting is, despite the critical acclaim, the review acknowledges that Smile has its critics.
Right. Some found it predictable, even unintentionally funny.
How does the reviewer address that?
Well, they admit the film uses some familiar horror tropes, so the predictability makes sense.
Okay.
But they say the execution, the way those elements are used, and the themes outweigh any flaws.
It's not just about originality for originality's sake, but about crafting something that resonates.
Exact.
And as for the unintentional humor, the review suggests it just shows how subjective horror can be.
What one person finds scary, another might find funny, you know?
Like that saying, one man's trash is another man's treasure, but with horror movies.
Exactly.
That's a great point to ponder as we move to the next part of our deep dive.
Yeah.
We've looked at the initial impressions, the use of horror elements, the themes of trauma and mental health,
Right.
but we haven't talked about the ending yet.
Oh, yes. The ending. That's where things get really interesting.
And it seems like a bit of a sticking point for some viewers.
Yeah. The reviewer had mixed feelings at first, but they ultimately came to appreciate it.
Sounds intriguing.
So let's delve into that next and unpack why it left such a lasting impression. So the ending of Smile is really where things come to a head.
Yeah.
Like all the deeper stuff we've been talking about, it kind of explodes there.
Right.
You know, the reviewer initially felt like it was a bit predictable, maybe even cliche, but after thinking about it more, they realized it was actually pretty brilliant.
Okay, so let's break that down a bit. What was it about the ending that threw the reviewer off at first, and what made them change their mind?
Well, without spoiling too much for our listener, the ending does play into some familiar horror tropes.
Right, those go-to conclusions we've seen a million times.
Exactly. But what sets Smile apart is how it uses those tropes to really drive home the theme of trauma's cyclical nature.
That's really interesting. We've talked about how the film explores trauma throughout, but what do you mean by the cyclical nature of it?
It's like the ending suggests that trauma isn't something you just get over and move on from.
Yeah.
It can linger, haunt you, and come back in unexpected ways.
Ooh, that's scary. Like a wound that never fully heals.
Exactly. Always vulnerable to being reopened.
So even when you think you've escaped the trauma, it can still have this grip on you, even years later.
Yeah.
That's a chilling thought, and it makes the ending so much more powerful.
Right. And it ties back to the idea of the smile as a mask, hiding our true feelings.
Yeah.
The ending suggests that those buried emotions, those unresolved traumas, can break through.
No matter how hard we try to suppress them.
Exactly. It's like the film is saying you can't outrun your past.
Ooh, that's heavy.
It's a message that really sticks with you, gives Smile that lasting power.
That feeling of unease that lingers.
And I think that's what ultimately won the reviewer over.
Yeah.
It's not just a chief scare or a predictable twist. It's a conclusion that reinforces the movie's core ideas.
And leaves you with that lingering sense of dread.
Right.
So it sounds like Smile really gets under your skin.
It does.
Yeah.
Literally and figuratively.
And despite being skeptical at first, the reviewer gave the film a pretty good score.
Yeah, they gave it an 8 out of 10.
Wow, that's pretty high.
Called it one of their favorite horror movies of the year.
They really came around.
They praised how it mixes genuine scares with deeper, more thought-provoking stuff, which is hard to pull off in horror.
It speaks to the director's skill, Parker Finn.
Yeah, this was his directorial debut.
Oh, wow. Really?
The reviewer even called him a rising star.
It makes you wonder what he'll do next.
Yeah, Smile has definitely got people talking, and Finn's future in horror seems bright.
For sure. It's also interesting to think about how Smile fits into the bigger picture of horror movies.
Right.
We talked about how it takes inspiration from films like The Ring and It Follows, but it also feels connected to this current trend of horror that explores social anxieties and trauma.
Yeah, it's not just about monsters and gore anymore.
Right. It's about those deeper fears, the cracks in our reality that can feel so real.
And Smile blurs that line between real and unreal masterfully.
The supernatural stuff is scary, but it's the grounding in relatable human experiences that makes it truly disturbing.
It makes you question your own sanity.
Your perception of what's real.
And that's what elevates Smile.
It's not just about scaring you. It's about making you think, question, and confront those darker parts of yourself.
Those parts we often try to hide.
And isn't that what great art is supposed to do?
To challenge us, make us uncomfortable, force us to confront things we'd rather avoid.
Totally. It's about pushing those boundaries, exploring those taboo subjects, and starting conversations we might not have otherwise.
And that brings us right back to the smile.
Such a simple concept.
Yeah, but so powerful in this movie.
It's something we all know, something we see every day.
But smile twists us, warps it into something sinister.
Representing those hidden anxieties and fears lurking beneath the surface of our lives.
It reminds us that things aren't always what they seem.
Those friendly faces might be hiding something much darker.
It makes you wonder, who can you trust?
Right, who's genuinely happy and who's just putting on a brave face.
That's a question the film leaves us with, and it sticks with you.
And I think that's a perfect segue into our final thoughts for our listener.
Yeah.
We've covered the critical praise, the use of horror tropes, the exploration of trauma and mental health.
We've looked at the symbolism, the atmosphere, the thought-provoking ending.
But now we want to turn it over to you, the listener.
What stood out to you? What resonated most with your own experiences?
Yeah, it's wild how Smile gets at those, universal fears. The anxieties we all have but don't really talk about.
It's giving a voice to the stuff that keeps us up at night.
Exactly.
And it does it in this way that's both terrifying and weirdly kind of cathartic.
Oh, interesting.
Like, horror can be a way to confront our fears
Yeah.
safely,
Uh-huh.
process those anxieties through fiction.
Mm-hmm.
It's like facing your demons, but in a controlled way.
Right, you can always just turn the movie off if it gets too much.
Exactly. It's like a pressure valve.
Releasing those pent-up emotions.
Without having to deal with them directly in our own lives.
And Smile seems really good at triggering those deep fears.
The reviewer definitely thought so. They even mentioned how some people found it unintentionally funny,
Oh, right.
which just shows how different everyone's experience with horror can be.
Totally.
What's scary to one person might be hilarious to another.
It all depends on our own experiences, how much we can handle, even our sense of humor.
Yeah, for sure.
But no matter how you react to Smile, it sticks with you.
It does.
It leaves this seed of unease, this dread that makes you question everything.
And that's the power of it, right?
Mhm.
It's not just the scares, it's the questions it raises, the anxieties it brings up.
It makes you think about how we deal with trauma and mental health as a society.
So for our listener, we've explored a lot.
The critical response, the horror elements, the themes of trauma.
The symbolism, the atmosphere, that ending.
But now we want to hear from you.
Would you recommend Smile to a friend?
Yeah, what parts of the film really got to you?
And maybe most importantly, what are your thoughts on how we as a society deal with trauma and mental health?
Are we doing enough to support those who are struggling?
Are we creating a space where people feel safe to open up about their vulnerabilities?
Those are big questions, way bigger than just horror movies.
True, but maybe Smile can get those conversations started.
Yeah, maybe can make us more compassionate, understanding, and supportive of those who are dealing with these challenges.
And maybe, just maybe, by facing these fears in a horror movie,
Right.
we can find the courage to face them in our own lives.
To create a world where people feel seen and heard.
So if you're thinking about watching Smile,
Remember, it's more than just a scary movie.
it's a reflection of our own anxieties, our struggles,
Our attempts to make sense of a world that can feel pretty dark.
and maybe by facing those fears head on, we can find a little bit of hope in all that darkness.
This has been a fascinating deep dive.
It really has.
Thanks for joining us.